We are joined by Kayla Madsen, the Director of Gaming EMEA at TransPerfect Gaming. How are you doing today?
Great, thank you.
So this is a real easy interview for me because I'm genuinely fascinated by localization in all its forms and the ways you can do it right and the ways that a lot of us see it done very wrong. So what is it that you guys do at TransPerfect Gaming?
That's a great question. So basically we provide a whole suite of services around localization, from adapting the actual content, both from the text translation, but also from cultural nuances, legal regulations, providing localization and linguistic quality assurance testing after the game, has been translated, and all the way through to audio recording or potentially community management or player support in any language.
So are you saying that it's not just you put it into Google Translate and then it's done?
Correct. That's a common misconception in the industry, that Google Translate is enough. For certain types of content or certain language tests, pilots, it might be okay. But we use or think of it more as a productivity tool these days, where there's a combination of machine translation and human translation. But most of the time for gaming, it really requires a human touch to make sure it's perfectly adapted for each market.
Gotcha. So beyond just the translation itself, there's a lot of other things to consider, like the way that different cultures react to certain cultural signifiers. There's UI, there's even the way that transactions are conducted in different places. So when someone brings a game to you to localize, where do you start? What's the first thing you look at?
Yeah, the first thing we tend to look at is just understanding what the business goals are, or the business objectives of that game, right? In terms of, is it increasing number of players? Is it, they're already located or they're already selling in a certain market, but they want to increase that player engagement or increase the retention of the players. So looking at what the customer or the game company's goals are, and then based on their goals, we can create a plan, right? If we need to do cultural analysis of the content, if we need to advise on certain things that need to be cut out, and then how to start adapting it, right? From the translation of the words to potentially visuals or recording of audio or dialogues within the game.
So is it something that developers need to be factoring in right from the beginning of development? Or do you get a lot of people just, it's an afterthought, it's something they kind of bring to you once the game is complete and then you have a lot of work to do afterwards?
That's correct. I actually gave a presentation this morning on the risks of translation being an afterthought or localization. Because what ends up happening is if it's then left till the very end, it's rushed. They usually skip best practices, you don't have enough time to do all the steps. And then you end up having like a poor quality result of your game, right? So it is important that localization is thought of earlier in the process, specifically because of what you mentioned before, that icons, colors, different things can be considered very different in different markets. And then, for example, you have things like expansion, right? In German, text will expand by 35%, whereas in like Nordic languages or in English, it will reduce by up to 15%. So the spatial requirements for the text or the content is also very different. And if it's not thought of up front, it can be very problematic later on.
This is where you get text spilling off the edge of the screen, and I hadn't considered that one. But what about regional app stores? Because just getting things onto the app stores, generally speaking, is hard work, and there's a lot of kind of barriers you have to jump over and loopholes to go through. But then regionally, again, there's lots of different rules and regulations to get through. You guys help with that as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So based on what markets you're trying to get into and what's your target player audience, we have different ways of optimizing your app store content and making sure that it's most relevant and localized so that you'll get the most downloads in those regions. And we have different hubs in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, so we can help depending on whatever platform you're trying to reach players on.
Have you encountered instances where players have brought you games, or sort of developers have brought you a game or something and said, look, we want to take this to this market over here, and you've taken a look at the game, the genre, the style, everything else, and kind of thought, this isn't going to work for that particular region? Are there some things that just can't be localized?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously there are different appetites and different games that are, or genres that are more popular in different markets. We don't necessarily provide the ROI or consulting specifically on that, but we might give feedback from a cultural perspective on what is most likely to be accepted in certain markets or what's, the cultural preferences. And then based on that, the game developer themselves might have to look at, if it makes sense or if the ROI is there to adapt the entire game. Sometimes it requires just a few tweaks, cutting out a few sections or adapting a few things. Other times, like you said, it just might not take in those markets.
How did you folks weather the pandemic? Did you notice any changes in the kind of things that were being requested of you, or was it sort of business as usual, just remotely?
During the pandemic, one of the things that we noticed was due to the inability to go into offices or studios, there was a lot of requests for remote recording. So people who needed to record audio or dialogue of games, in-game content. And so we were able to do that through a cloud computing technology that we have where you can record from at-home studios, and it provides high quality, top quality recordings.
What's the biggest leap that's happened in the kind of the localization space? Because I imagine 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it literally was like, right, we just need to find someone who speaks whatever language it may be. But now you're talking about, I realize there's a lot of systems in place that are maybe AI driven and things like that, but what's the biggest leap forward in the space?
So one of the biggest leaps forward that we've seen is basically around AI and machine translation. About 7 or 10 years ago, you had really bad machine translation or really good human translation, right? And so now, as I mentioned before, it's really become a productivity tool where the mix of both of those creates a hybrid approach, which can be much more cost effective and actually a lot faster in terms of time to market. So we're seeing it being incorporated in many more aspects of the work that we're doing. However, we still see that the human piece is really necessary still. We're not there yet where AI is going to take over all our jobs.
And what are you folks working on for this year? Now the world's unlocked again, is it back into the recording booths physically to take care of that stuff, or are you going to be keeping some of that remote working kind of mindset?
We're definitely doing a bit of both, right? We're taking the best of both worlds in this case, and we're able to have people in our offices or in our studios or in our testing hubs. However, we're still also leveraging people being able to work from anywhere. So we're able to leverage great talent and great voices or great translators that maybe live in more rural or remote areas that normally wouldn't want to travel or wouldn't want to relocate for a full-time job. But now we're able to work with those resources all over the world. So it's definitely the best of both worlds. We're combining both.